Welcome, everybody, to ProCon 2021 and the JCC Excellence Showcase. Um, this afternoon's session is Guiding Values for Decision Making, a Foundation for Strategic Planning, from our friends at the Boulder JCC. My name is Mark S. Young. I'm the Director of J-Response at JCC Association of North America. This session is being recorded. We understand that some people do not wish to be recorded, in which case you may turn off your camera, though we encourage everyone who is comfortable doing so to stay visible so we can feel as if we are all together. We received an outpouring of submissions for Showcase, and while there was limited space at ProCon for presentations, we will share a post-conference digital library of all submissions. We will be holding a Q&A at the end of the session. You may choose to hold your questions or drop them in the chat during the presentation I will be monitoring. Without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome today's presenters from the Boulder JCC, the CEO, Jonathan Lev, Cynthia Weinger, the Senior Director of Operations, and let me spotlight her as well, and Kai Murga-Canales, Marketing and Communications Director. I'm going to spotlight all of them and unspotlight me, and Jonathan, all to you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'm so thrilled to have all of you here today and for all of us to be together at ProCon. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to get us started here. And okay, so just so everyone knows, we're going to go through a process. We're going to present for about 15 minutes, talk with you about how this whole process worked for us in terms of creating guiding values for our decision making as an organization, how we implemented them, how we used them, some challenges that came up. And our goals are so that you walk away with some real ways of being able to utilize a similar thing in your organization, or how to be able to implement it, and some of the pitfalls that we came to, and how you might be able to do it even better. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat during the presentation, and then depending on size, although it seems like we have a lot, we'll probably continue in the chat and we'll try to answer them. Some of them we may be able to answer as the presentation is going, others we may wait. We'll do that. We should have around 15 minutes to do those presentations, to answer those questions. So here's a little background for you. It was back in the early March, and we as an organization started hearing more and more about what was happening with COVID, and we were trying to make some decisions. And we had an emergency meeting with our entire senior team to try to figure out what we were going to do at this time. And it happened on March 9th in the morning. And you can see a little sketch right here, guiding values on the right, and the team on the left. It was actually an in-person meeting, just in the office where Kai is sitting right now. And when we sat there and we were all together, our Senior Director of Operations, Cynthia Weinger, who's going to be presenting today, said, before we start, I need to understand what are the framework, what are the values, what are the things we're going to use to make decisions right now. And we started brainstorming. And this brainstorm was actually this piece of paper. And from that piece of paper, we actually were able to come up with what ended up being 7 guiding values at that time for us to be able to use in decision making. And those 7 values we codified at that point and actually have not changed at all. So they're the same 7 values that we established at that point, and we've used them all over the agency. And we're going to share how we've used them and where we've used them, both in crisis as well as in other places. And out of this meeting, we really got an understanding of what it means to be a values-based organization, values-based leadership in our organization, how to think from a transformative management perspective and what that could look like. And then really who was impacted by the decisions, our stakeholders. So it forced us to think through them. So if you read through these, they are the safety, security, and health of our staff, students, and community is our top priority. We have a deep respect and care for our staff and community. Family first. We'll distribute information thoughtfully. We are committed to open, honest, and transparent communication. We are committed to organizational sustainability. and we will rapidly, thoroughly, and proactively explore possibilities. And you can notice at the end, we put this quote there. The only way to get it together is together. Reb Zalman actually was a rabbi who lived in Boulder and had a really huge impact on us as a community. But this particular statement felt like it was right in terms of how we were approaching our decision making, and helped be a North Star and a guiding light for us. So with that, I want to pass over to Kai to talk a little bit about the start of the implementation process.
Thanks, Jonathan. So after we created these, or codified these guiding values for decision making, we immediately started implementing them, not just in the decision-making process, but as part of our communications as well. And as Jonathan shared, one of those guiding values was transparent communication. That transparency also means that everyone was going to be able to see what these guiding values that we were using for decision-making were. So we immediately started, we created this slide that you all just saw, and that's on the screen here. And it's how we open every single meeting, whether with staff, with our board, with families in the early childhood center or camp, rental clients, town halls with the community. It opens every single meeting, regardless of how often we meet with that group. It is how we begin presentations and how we frame the conversation that we're about to have. And typically we will call out one or two of the values here that are most specific or to the conversation we're going to have. And we followed a similar model for all of our internal and external written communications. So we will also frame all of the communications we're sending through one or two of these values to help tell that story that we want to communicate with the community. And again, back to transparency and how we were using this. A clear example of this back in the early days of COVID, when we really were just not sure what was happening. Are we opening for the summer? Is there going to be camp? Is there not? Because we had these guiding values, especially open, honest, and transparent communication. At no point did we wait until we had all the answers or until we could share exactly what folks were wanting to know. We said, we're committed to open, honest, and transparent communication. And that means this is an email where we're going to tell you what we know, what we don't know, what we're working on, what we think that could mean for us. And we're going to keep keeping you informed. And it really started to transform our relationship into communications and to our community by using this model. And so over the last 13-ish months at this point, we have continued using this model for all of our COVID communications, but beyond that as well, which Cynthia is going to be talking a little bit more about. And I'm actually going to turn it over now to Cynthia to talk a little bit more about implementing these values in decision making.
Thanks, Kai. These truly became our operating procedures. We, as I'm sure all of you can relate, have been in a constant evolving door of decision making. And I want to share 3 examples of decisions that demonstrate how we implemented these guiding values when making decisions. So the first example I want to give is when we were faced with the incredibly challenging time of figuring out financial implications of COVID and looking at the impact and what we needed to do in terms of reduction in hours, salary reductions, furloughs. It was a really challenging time. And the guiding value that we were really focused on was organizational sustainability. And as we were making some of these decisions, we saw one of our first challenges emerge in how these actually operated. And that was, what happens if 2 guiding values seem to be in conflict with each other? And ultimately where we landed with that is they're not in conflict. They can be upheld simultaneously. One guiding value may take priority, but how can we make a decision that demonstrates and portrays all of the values simultaneously? So an example here that you see us sharing right now is when we had to make the very difficult decision for organizational sustainability to implement reduction in hours for some staff, salary cuts across the board, furloughs, incredibly challenging things to implement. We wanted to also uphold our values of family first and that we have a deep care and respect for our staff and community. And so how we actually communicated those decisions, how we open and honestly and transparently shared why we were making these decisions, what our financial realities were, and also recognizing that we wanted to make sure that we were properly taking care of our staff. One of the decisions that we made was that we set up an emergency relief fund for employees that all employees could access without our knowing, and that allowed us to uphold the value of our deep care for our staff while simultaneously upholding the value of organizational sustainability. And these were decisions that, that we had to make. Another example is navigating in person. So when we were 100% remote back in March, we were focused on a June 1st reopening date for reopening our early childhood center and our summer camps. And we came to the decision of, as we were navigating what to do with graduation, that it was a real priority of ours to recognize the deep care that we have for our community and what their needs are right now, and recognizing the importance of having an opportunity for people to gather in person and for our families to mark the end of year. That was something we didn't feel we could compromise on, and that it was really clear to us that this was something our community needed, and that even though we were incredibly focused on we need to reopen, what our bandwidth was and what we could prioritize, that this opportunity for our community was front and center, and we needed to provide this experience. The third example that I want to share is actually an example that helped us see how these values could help guide our decision-making in a world outside of COVID. This is a decision that we were faced with that wasn't related to COVID, which was we were looking at our benefit renewal, our health benefits. Our open enrollment was coming up in the fall, and I can share that Jonathan and Peggy, our Senior Director of Finance, went into a meeting with the commitment of this is not a year we're going to make change, and we don't have capacity, we're going to renew, and that's very much the intent that they had. And lo and behold, the presentation of options came forth, and it became very clear that there were some unbelievable opportunities for us that we couldn't afford to look away from. And so the decision to really focus on the guiding value of that we will rapidly, thoroughly, and proactively explore all possibilities took front and center, and we dove in and really looked at our benefit options. We really continued to hear feedback that we had gotten from our staff over the years, and looked at how much feedback we had gotten around benefits and our desire to focus on health insurance and mental health this year. And we were presented with an opportunity to switch our health provider and move to a platform that had incredible benefits, including unlimited free telehealth, including mental health therapists, free telehealth sessions, and some really interesting motion benefits that allowed staff members through steps to get money back on the program, allowed us to reduce premiums. We, at a time when we thought we didn't have capacity, we rapidly, thoroughly, and proactively explored all possibilities, and we wound up making a decision to change our health provider. The last thing that I'll share, one of the challenges that came up for us was, what do we call these? And so one of the things that we saw emerging as we were using these values and making decisions was that they were emerging as values for the organization. And we were navigating how we would use language to communicate that they are lenses through which we are making decisions, that they weren't our overarching values as an organization. And so that is something that we've still been talking about and navigating of these are guiding values for decision-making, which are different than our overarching values as an organization. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to Jonathan, who's going to talk a little bit more about how we saw the effectiveness and wrap us up so we have time for some Q&A.
Great, I'll do this relatively quickly. The things that really helped us in terms of implementing these, this list is here. One of the biggest ones for us was a shared language. I'm just gonna note that one, because as you've seen, we started to recognize and realize the power that these were having. And not only were we saying them as senior leadership of the organization, they were coming in and out. They were flowing between staff members. People were mentioning them. They were coming up in hiring process and other things. So that it became infused in our work. And it really built the trust and transparency amongst all leadership. So board, staff, senior staff, and community. It sort of became this great layering system that we had. And the piece that Cynthia really mentioned about the applicability in crisis, but also being able to use them in daily decisions, that effectiveness has really helped us in decisions. Even yesterday, we were making a decision and we were looking at these values to try to make sure, like, what are we missing? What else is there that we should be considering? And I'll leave us lastly with a quote. This is a JCC staff member who was sent in a thank you anonymously to our team for that program that Cynthia mentioned earlier about supporting our staff. And what was so great, this was the first time that a non-leadership staff member was actually communicating these values directly back to us. And at that point, we realized we had touched on something really powerful, because that's where the sort of synergy can happen, is when it becomes infused as part of the values of an organization. And so with that, I want to open up to questions, and there's already a couple. I'm going to stop sharing, and we'll go into those questions. I thank you all for joining us. There's a lot of us here, so I'm going to go back up here. The first question here from Michael in Scottsdale, what intentions or explorations have you all had in revisiting these defined values as either staffing change or values evolve? So this is a great question, because we constantly have asked, are we missing something? So most recently, the conversation around this has actually been centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion. That was one of the areas we were trying to figure out, like, is there something missing? Because we kept on having these pieces of conversation, and ultimately we came to, it's possible we may include and add something around equity. We didn't finalize it yet, but it's in process. So these are, the values are an evolution. I do think that they will continue to change as our staff changes, as our community changes, and as we have conversations around them. Cynthia, Kai, anything else on that one?
No, I'll just add that as our staffing changed, we have onboarded about 15 staff members during COVID, since COVID started, and we do include this in our onboarding. So it is something that we share with new staff members so that it becomes a living practice for them to be included as well.
The next question, Kai, this one will be directed to you. When you share communications, do you include the value that it's connected to, meaning do you ensure that the reader recipient can clearly identify the value? And maybe speak about both internal stuff that we've done and potentially even community stuff.
Yeah, so we do, and I think that links back to what Jonathan was saying about the power of consistency. So the fact that we share these values at the beginning of every staff meeting, every town hall, every parent meeting, it then means that when we send an email out or we're putting something out to the community where we're referencing one of these values, the reader can connect these two ideas. Oh, I've heard Jonathan talk about this. I've heard Susie, our senior director of the Early Childhood Center, talk about this when she's, framing what's going to happen in the fall. And so we do try to make that link, and it is that consistency, that shared language that we've built with the community, so that they can make that link for themselves, and everything is based in values.
One of the things that Kai and I realized that as we started using these more, and Cynthia touched on this, the sort of the difference between organizational values and these values, I think it's still in a confusion place. I think there is some aspects of what we've created here, and it may need even a different term, like a framework for decision making or something like that, that could change that piece. But the values are definitely, we have that piece. What Kai and I found is, as we started referencing these more, we started actually referencing, we use a modified version of the Jewish lenses that were created for the Sheva framework as an organizational values at this point. And so we started actually pulling from those more, because we started realizing the power of connecting things to values as a whole. Kai or Cynthia, maybe we could put in the chat, copy into the chat all of those values, because there's some requests to be able to see them. Also, we'll let you know that all of these slides will be available, if they're not already, for everyone to be able to see, and we're happy to answer questions around these as things come up. So the next question here, how do you explain that donations are now giving to support operations versus giving back to the community? A little bit different question, not necessarily. It's a much longer answer. The short answer of that for us, we are a little bit different style JCC than many other JCCs. We were actually built without a membership model, without fitness, as a programmatic and education and cultural center. And as part of that model, we built development as a core element of who we are. And so our development team is a 5.5 member development team, which is very different from many other JCCs. We see it as it's the #1 business center, if you want to call it that, or for us, we've raised about 50% of our annual budget, which is between 6 and 7 million on an annual basis. So for us, there was no, it was just building on what we had always done. So it's a little bit different than other JCCs. But we use these to go to the values piece. We've actually used these with our donors. So most recently, I hosted a coffee chat with me and the president of the board with any of our donors who were over $1,800 a year. And we started with these guiding values for decision making. And it was a really interesting piece. And what I actually touched on was that we were selected for this showcase and to share this with the entire movement with this group. So that was actually what I shared about the values at the most recent talk, which was just last week. So they are being consistently used. How frequently were you communicating, and what did you find worked best in sharing this with staff versus community? It's extremely frequent. And Kai, do you want to talk about the nuance, the difference between staff and community?
Sure. I mean, so I feel like we talk with everyone very frequently, and especially at the beginning of this, 13 months ago, we were having weekly staff meetings. Meeting with our donors regularly. I think we met probably weekly or sometimes twice a week with our ECC parents and our camp families as we reopened those programs. And, the frequency has changed over time, but we are still gathering with each of those constituencies on a regular basis. And, I think that we shared these values with, whether it was staff or external, in very similar ways. They always start every presentation. We speak about them using the same language. It's really to give not just our staff, but the entire community, a behind the scenes look at our process and, you know, how we're making decisions and what it is that we're sharing and doing. And, you know, I think that ties back a little bit also to the donor piece. You know, it's 13 months of our donors really understanding the behind the scenes of what's been happening, which has built an incredible amount of trust and transparency and, you know, deeper connections with the organization.
Yeah, to build on that donor piece, I think that the trust that we were able to create. At first, I was saying, like, we've never done more and we've never raised, we've never done less and we've never raised more in relationship to it. And as I realized what was happening, it actually became true that we actually were doing an incredible amount. It just looked different. And we just had to figure out how we were communicating that and how we were pivoting and what that looked like. So, you know, we started communicating more with our community about what we were doing and how we were doing it. And so the my board president and I would send out monthly updates, which we do, and we'll sometimes connect to holidays, but other times it's just, here's what we're thinking about right now. Here are the challenges we have, and really being open and honest in that communication, and using that guiding value in terms of those pieces. The uncertainty becomes comfortable for people, and because they have knowledge around it, and they feel like they're part of those decisions and they can influence them. I believe we have a couple more minutes left, and I don't know if there's any additional questions. If not, Mark, do you have any questions for us, or I'm happy to continue talking?
Yeah, I first of all, I'm not sending our closing announcements just yet, but I just want to thank you how inspiring this conversation has been of how we can use these values to guide our decision making and to share with them all the time, to have it be open. Is there anything that you haven't touched on that you like? Is there what's the one takeaway or insight you want us to all kind of have at the tip of our tongue as we're walking out of this session? What's one way that we can start this process or move on this journey at our JCCs?
Cynthia or Kai, do you want to take the answer to this, or would you like me to?
Go for it, Jonathan.
Go for it.
Okay, great. So I think the key piece is we all are making tremendous amounts of decisions in our work. And at JCCs, there's a lot of different factors and stakeholders and community members and staff. I mean, we are big entities with doing a lot. And it becomes challenging to figure out how to include all of the different aspects when we're making decisions. And having values or having a set or a framework to be able to go back to helps ground all of those pieces so that you can be inclusive of all aspects of what's necessary in making decisions. So for us, that was extremely powerful, and has changed the way that we operate, who we include in decisions even, and how we communicate them have changed. So I would leave everyone with, this may not be the right way for your organization to do, set up values and use a framework like this. And having something as a backbone for decisions will help everyone be on the same page. Let's see. And Cynthia?
I just want to add, and I'll sort of tie this into the last question that just came in about that you are correct that you're hearing us say that these guiding values for making decisions are different than our agency values. And that is something that we have struggled with, of how do we communicate and use a framework that aren't 100% agency values. And an example I can give is when working with our ECC families, we framed conversations we were having through, we use the Sheva framework in both our ECC and across our organization. And some of you may be familiar with the Jewish lens of Brit or covenant. That notion of we are in community together and we're responsible for each other and our actions impact each other. And in having conversations with our school families around their decisions and how much their decisions impact the health and wellness of our school, we looked at our core value of that covenantal relationship that we have. That's an agency value. It's not a value that guided our decisions that we were making as an organization, but it was a value that framed our conversation. So there are agency values that are separate from guiding values that we were using to make decisions.
Jonathan, Cynthia, Kai, I want to thank you on behalf of JCC Association and the well over 100 people that joined this session. As Jonathan said, all of the materials and this recording will be available on SpotMe. Before you go, I want to remind everyone that a second set of JCC Excellence Showcase initiatives, totally different from those that you've just seen, follows this session. So if you like this session, there's another great one starting right now. Check out the full list of options on SpotMe to select your next session. Don't forget J Cafe at 5:15 Eastern. And thank you again for attending and being a part of ProCon 2021. And thank you again to the leadership of the Boulder JCC and your excellent showcase.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to everyone and a number of my colleagues who joined us, and almost our entire senior team who is here as well, who have been critical in these pieces. So, and our esteemed leader of Daron, thank you for joining us. So, wish everyone well. Hope to see more of you in the coming days of coming day of the conference.
Okay. Take care.